Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 79 of the Cloudcast. We are back and coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And tonight we are joined by our very first member of the Cloudcast Five Timers Club. So Mr. Nick Weaver, welcome back to the show.
Hey guys, how we doing?
Good. We're good. Aaron, how are you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good.
Good. And we're also joined by one of Nick's DevOps members, and what we found is we've had the president of the private cloud, we've had the most interesting man in the cloud, and tonight we've got the friendliest man in DevOps. We're really excited to have Gene Kim on tonight. Gene, welcome.
Hey, glad to be on. I've actually never heard that title before, but delighted to win it. Woohoo!
Well, I tell you what, man. So two things. One, I've never ever seen. You see pictures of people all the time and bio pictures and headshots. Yours always has this just enormous smile on it, and it's not just like a little one. I mean, you're just happy about what you do, which is very cool. And the other thing, Gene is our very first. So typically when we have guests, and Aaron knows this, and Nick knows this, we tend to reach out to folks because we think they're very, very interesting. And obviously we try and find everybody we can. Gene was our very first, demanded by our listeners, and not by one or two listeners, but a ton of people said, why in the world haven't you had Gene on the show? And you're starting to talk about DevOps. So this should be not only a very good show, but hopefully, we're doing what our listeners want us to do. So glad to have you on, Gene.
Oh, right on. No, delighted to be here.
So we were joking around before. Nick, are you allowed to tell us what you're working on? Or are you still in secret land?
Well, I'm allowed to say that I work with the hybrid cloud services group now. Okay. Which was announced recently.
Very good. So now you're now out of the secret VMware cloud, and you're now in the semi-secret VMware cloud world.
Yeah, I can't say what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, or how it'll work out. But yes, I am working on the new hybrid cloud services, which has been announced, and aggressively will compete against AWS and others.
Cool. Very cool. Well, good. Well, let's jump into this because I know we're sort of we want to make sure we stay on time. We were all joking around about trying to fit in podcasts and other stuff around our real boss's schedule. So first and foremost, Gene, you've got a brand new book out, a book called The Phoenix Project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is a project that I've been working on and off for about 10 years, and full-time for about 3 years. And it's a novel. The full title is The Phoenix Project, a novel about IT, DevOps, and helping your business win. And, for me, it really is meant to model. It was modeled very closely after a book that had a huge influence on me. I mean, it's been the most influential book in my entire professional career, and was called The Goal. That was written by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt in the 80s. And it was a novel about a plant manager who had to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days. Otherwise, they shut the plant down. And so even though I've never worked in a plant, or I've certainly never managed a plant, I mean, just seeing the world through Alex's eyes was so eye-opening. And so even though I couldn't concretely say that I had actually been in that position before, I knew it was actually very important, and that there were some lessons that was very important to me.
Okay.
And so basically the Phoenix Project is a novel about a reluctant VP of IT operations who has to fix his project due date issues, operational stability issues, security and compliance issues in 90 days. Otherwise, they're all going to get outsourced. And, I'm just delighted that the book is finally out, and I've been delighted with the feedback so far.
Good. Very good. Yeah, I had a chance to, I wanted to be a good host, and so I went out and I got an excerpt of it, which I thought, okay, I'll get 15 or 20 pages. It was like half the book, which is good. I read through it, and I'll tell you, it's an interesting read. It's a very good. It's not your typical technical book, right? It's got characters in it, and it's got plot, and so it's about 170 pages of this guy just and all the miseries that you hear in IT. It's the development group doesn't get along with the operations group, and management doesn't really understand their problems, and then all of a sudden I got to the end and I was like, oh crap, Gene only gave me half the book. He didn't give me the part that talks about the fix.
Now you have to buy it.
So it was a classic sort of teaser in it. But from the parts that I've read so far, and obviously some folks that we've talked to in the past that have read it, tons of people love the book.
And just excellent reviews on both Amazon and, like you said, on Twitter. The listeners that said they wanted you on absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I think in terms of the feedback, right, it's been really interesting to me, and I think it was, we actually specifically designed and constructed the book in this way, but still sort of like the response has been just overwhelmingly sort of validated sort of the approach, which is, the reaction is primarily, holy cow, I recognize these characters, I recognize these problems, I recognize these disasters, right? And it comes from, every kind of walk of life in IT, whether it's a startup or in an enterprise. And I think more than anything, it sort of paints the futility and the hopelessness of status quo. When you don't have dev and ops working together, you're almost, failure is almost preordained, right? And so not only does ops not win or dev not win, right, the business ultimately loses. And then the kind of the business survival mechanism is to outsource it, not realizing that, IT is, this core competency they must have. IT, the business, regardless of what business they think they're in, is an IT company. And, I think you see it, in the numbers, right? 95% of capital projects have an IT component. 50% of capital spending is IT related. So for any company, IT is not a currency, is just an absurd assertion. So, I think the book is really constructed to show that, regardless of whether you're dev, ops, test, information security, when you have large batch sizes, when you don't have these groups working together, that failure really is preordained. And, I think it's been, very interesting to sort of see the feedback. It's like, okay, I see the DevOps, I now have the DevOps aha moment that I had, 4 or 5 years ago. And by the way, Nick, I will never forget hanging out with you at VMworld. That must have been 4 years ago, where we were sort of talking through some of the plot points of this and just that incredible head session we have about, like, what are the kind of critical components to get fast flow, from dev into ops into production, while preserving stability, reliability, security, and so forth.
Yeah, I it's funny how you can have a conversation 4 years later, remember it vividly, and it's funny how, it's not that it was a huge part of it, but it's funny how watching the evolution of your thought processes and kind of the narrative you've written, and how it's like you hooked on these core problems that have developed in the IT departments and in the flows, and it's funny how a lot of those things we talked about before, I can see the evolution of those ideas about what you were sharing now in the narrative, and it's awesome.
Yeah, no.
So Gene, does that mean Nick gets a cut of the book proceeds?
It's already been arranged.
So I've got this question. So Aaron and I have been hanging around this local technology kind of meetup thing. It's the local North Carolina DevOps group, and everybody who's in that, it's a lot of ex guys who are at Red Hat or various sysadmin. It's a very sysadmin driven culture. It's a very Linux centric culture. And so most of the guys that are there, their business is literally the technology they deliver. So, it's a bunch of those companies. And so the thing that always comes up, and I was kind of contrasting this to what was in the book, is when you talk about DevOps, is DevOps only an environment where, like, the product that you deliver is technology? Or, does this have any applicability for sort of traditional IT that's not just developing their own stuff, they're using packaged stuff? Is there a world for that, or is this really exclusively for folks that are developing their own software and the merger with them in operations?
Yeah, so in the Phoenix project, the company that everyone's working for is this 150-year-old parts company called Parts Unlimited. They just make parts, right? The auto parts, and they have a retail joint. And we specifically chose a company, a vertical, right, that was, the lowest tech we could find, right? If we could have, and we actually were thinking about making a gravel manufacturer, a gravel crusher, right? But, it didn't seem credible. And so, our assertion is, and we're starting to gather the proof points to show that DevOps isn't just for the Twitters and the Etsy's and the Googles and the Amazons and the Pinterests. It's any place where where the business has a high reliance on IT, whether it's in the project delivery or in on the delivered services, and I think that's basically every company these days. And it's not just for these kind of online services companies. It's for everybody. And I kind of view the world and the Amazon and the Pinterest, the Twitters, they're like the 1%ers. The 99%ers are like the people in the enterprise. And I see DevOps as this ray of hope of how you can elevate the quality of life in IT everywhere, as well as dramatically improve throughput and productivity. And just to show you kind of how these patterns apply to the enterprise, I mean, they can be done on SAP, PeopleSoft, Oracle Financials, right? I mean, as long as you can sort of get things checked into version control, as long as you can automate the deployments, right? You can do these things on even these more complex, more monolithic enterprise applications. There's a case study where HP basically applied many of these DevOps type principles. Obviously, they don't deploy to an online service, but they took the printer driver code from 87 models and merged it into one code base using many of the same techniques that used in continuous delivery and DevOps, like feature flags and so forth. And the amount of work that went through the roof, right? As you don't have to spend so much time merging, testing, integrating. Now people can work on features, as opposed to basically trying to get code to work and then deploy to a test environment. So if you can do it for printer driver code, right? I mean, you can certainly do it for WebLogic, SAP, PeopleSoft, Oracle, and we're building up a set of case studies to show kind of exactly what techniques you need to actually put into place to make this work. And I want to acknowledge there's a lot more organizational kung fu that needs to happen to sort of influence all the right stakeholders and get them to sort of do things that in a way that's been different. That looks very different than the way things have been done before. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think because that's always the discussion that goes on when people talk about cloud and web scale and kind of all the buzzwords these days is the most prominent use cases always tend to be the web scale companies. It's Netflix. It's it's the ones that you mentioned, and it's always it's a lot of this other people trying to figure out, like, does that apply to me? Should I care about that? Should I go learn some of those tools and stuff? And I mean, like, Nick, I know you were, prior to what you were doing before, even when you were at your old job before EMC and you were playing with Razor, like, you were trying to find that balance between just sort of the super modern stuff and, how do I apply this to even, Windows rollouts, right?
Yeah, and, I've been doing these keynotes at VMUGs talking about automation, and at first I thought, I'm just going to go and show off this cool tech. Look what Netflix is doing. Look what Etsy's doing. Look what GitHub's doing. Like, GitHub has some amazing, cool new stuff they came out with. And then, my friends over at Puppet Labs and Opscode, hey, look what these guys are doing and see how this benefits you. And then I realized really quickly that the disconnect is not actually the tech. The disconnect is why it's important. There's actually some patterns here. And I started to really focus more on the patterns and why this is important and what this does. And I think Gene just hit on it with things like version control. Like an old school sysadmin doesn't really understand version control on the ops side, right? He doesn't understand why it's important. But when you explain to him, what version control does, and you explain to him what idempotent control of your scripts can do with Puppet and all these different things, you start explaining to, like, these modern advances that developers did to manage their change, to manage their dependencies and all this stuff. And why that is so important on the ops side, it's amazing the light bulb that goes off. I mean, I've had one VMUG up in Toronto where I first did the big keynote on automation and why it's important and what it brings. And when I talked about things like, you have this 4,000 or 5,000 line PowerShell script and you replace it with this Puppet module and the differences there and what that does from an automation standpoint and continuous delivery and de-risking a bunch of stuff that eats a lot of your time. I mean, it was literally, there's people like shaking their heads in the audience and nodding and smiling. And it's just interesting how these are some really simple core principles to many people in like dev shops. But outside of the tech and the difficulty of it, it's actually not that hard to start going down some of these routes.
Yeah.
And let me add this too. I think you both hit on just a really key point is most people just really think DevOps doesn't apply to them, and they just never really dig into it. And compare that against, so Gene, kind of going back to one of your previous books, the Visible Ops Handbook, which is really more like ITIL focused, right? And that is, at least, seems to be in the industry kind of the exact opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to DevOps, right? And can you, like, for people that are unfamiliar, say, like, with DevOps or ITIL, like, compare and contrast the two of them very quickly, because the fact that you've written a book primarily on DevOps and a book primarily on ITIL, probably not many in the industry have done something like that.
I kind of view DevOps is kind of this ecumenical movement, right? That sort of combines all the aspirations and goals of like the ITIL community, the service management community, the agile community, the service-oriented architecture people. And so, in my mind, visible ops and service management, I mean, that was all about the control and eradication of unplanned work. I mean, that was a single sort of theme of visible ops. It was like, how do you sort of, enable reliable service by creating known good builds and so forth, controlling changes and configurations. What DevOps is kind of the exact inverse. It's about how do you sort of manage the fast flow of planned work so it flows quickly through the system without causing chaos downstream. I see them as very complementary, and in fact, I would say that a prerequisite for DevOps is you need to have a well-managed controlled environment that can be versioned, that's consistent, that's only then can you actually have these high deploy rates that you associate with DevOps. By the way, how are we doing here, guys? Is this
Yeah, no, we're doing great. We're doing great.
Okay, great. So I see them as perfectly consistent with each other, and in terms of empirical evidence that DevOps isn't just for the unicorns of Etsy and Google's, right? It's BNY Mellon, Bank of America, World Bank, Paychex, right? So in the financial services, you got retailers like the Gap, GameStop, right? You got universities and higher education like University of Portland, Seton Hill University. So I think the goal of all this is to say DevOps is for all of us, regardless of what industry we're in, whether we're what size of organization. These are like universal principles that apply to all of IT.
Yeah. Now, you obviously, you're writing this, but you guys are doing a bunch of research on this as well. As you're seeing people that are kind of adopting DevOps, being successful with it, do you find, because you talked a little earlier, like there's as much technology involved, or probably twice as much, people, process, kind of organizational stuff. Do you find that people start sort of with it as a side project, kind of figure it out, and then use it as a lighthouse back to the rest of their organization, or what are you seeing as a successful way for people to kind of start this thing, especially if they're not a complete greenfield?
Yeah, I think it all starts. I think there's a reason why kind of DevOps has a reputation of being bottom up, because it takes kind of the right relationships between what's that quote from Star Trek 6, right? Only Nixon can go to China. I mean, it starts with that relationship between ops and dev, right? To say, hey, look, we have a shared goal, and the way we're working, is counter to that. And one of them, Puppet Labs just released the 2012 State of DevOps survey. I just put that into the Skype window. Okay. And one of there are three things that predicts performance. One is how long have you been doing DevOps? Two is, do you have the environment checked into version control? And three is, do you have an automated process to build the environment from scratch? Right? And those three things predict performance. But one of the strongest signals that predicted, the four measures we were looking for, which is, code deploy rates. Is it daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly? The lead time for changes. How long do you have to wait from code commit to production? Is it weeks, hours, weeks, months, quarters? What is your change success rate? and what is your mean time to repair, one of the best predictors of all of those performance measures was how long have you been working at DevOps, right? I mean, literally, if you're not doing DevOps, 0.5% of that population, is in the high performer category, and something like 60%, if they've been working at DevOps for over a year, are in the high performer category. So it just shows that, the only way to get better is by trying, right? And to me, it was just a startling statistic.
It's a bit of the crawl, walk, run philosophy.
And it's even more, I would say, just to maybe even take that one step further, it's do painful things more frequently. It's like so in other words, if we want to do this, we have to keep trying, as opposed to the person who says, oh my gosh, I just ran a mile, that was horrible, let's not do this, as frequently, right? And, I'm not sure what the outcome we're hoping for is, we'll be better rested, right? It's, the answer really is, we got to run that mile, more often, right? And that's the only way we're going to get better.
Well, it's sort of like it's like the Malcolm Gladwell book, the Outliers book, that says, in order to become an expert at anything, it's about 10,000 hours, which, if you work that out, that's probably, that's about 5 years worth of straight working on it. But somewhere between probably year 1 and year 2, if you put your mind to it, you get to a point where that learning curve accelerates very, very quickly.
God, I love that. In fact, just to resonate with that, there's a growing school of thought. It's not only Malcolm Gladwell who wrote Outliers, but it's in sports training. It's in learning to play a musical instrument. It's in how the training is done in the special forces in the military. Yep. The basic underlying principle is that it is better to practice 15 minutes a day every day than it is to practice once a week for 3 hours. That it's daily repetition creates the habits, and it's the habits that create changed outcomes.
So Gene, one of the other things I picked up out of the book, and it was just a little bit in the half teaser portion that I got, but that's sort of intriguing to me. When the guy who's the potential board member comes to the guy who runs IT, and he says, I want to understand how you run, how you do things, and they get to talking, and then he takes him over to a factory, or to the company's factory, and he kind of draws this analogy to the place in the factory where they're making parts, and in essence he was talking about, in their case, raw material flow from whatever they were making through however it got shopped and tool and dyed out the door. And he tried to draw this analogy between information flow, development flow, test flow, production flow. I mean, is that the manufacturing industry, in the 70s and 80s, when it was General Motors, and then there was all the Deming stuff and everything that happened with, say, like Toyota, and they got much more efficient. I mean, is that a common analogy you see drawn between what people are trying to do with DevOps and what we learned with Lean and Just-in-Time and Six Sigma and all those things in manufacturing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think kind of one of the, many of the authorities cited in the DevOps community are like Deming, theory of strengths and so forth. And one of the aspirations that we had with the book was to actually just take that a step further and create the isomorphic mapping between the plant floor in manufacturing and the IT value stream. And so we wanted to very concretely sort of map kind of what is the equivalent of a work center on the plant floor to IT. How about the bill of materials, the production schedule? And we actually found that very enlightening, because if we can make IT look like a manufacturing plant floor, then we can use all the tools and techniques, from Lean, from the Toyota production system, from the theory of constraints, and derive kind of what those patterns of work should look like. And so for me, that was actually kind of one of the neatest part about writing the book, was to kind of create those very concrete mappings and show that IT knowledge work, right, isn't all about creativity and free form, right? Because actually, whenever you have recurring work, that's actually very important to standardize, and that's what allows us to do planning. And by getting that work under control and reducing variance there, that's what actually allows the most creative work to happen. To me, that was like one of the coolest parts of the book, was to really try to bring kind of our hero of the story through and get him to see see how IT is like the plant floor. And if Nick is there, I'd love to actually hear kind of his impressions on how effectively we did that.
I agree 100% with that. I mean, I think, the funny thing is it's been a while since I've been in a role. Gene, when we first met, I was back as a customer, and I was dealing with a lot of the same issues that you've, actually a fraction of the issues you covered in the book. But now in my current role, I'm starting to get involved in those kind of things again. And it's interesting now, like coming, 3 years later, going through being a vendor side, going through being, pre-sales and all these other roles, coming back to being in a group that's actually going to run hardware and run software and push out software releases. And I'm actually part of a team that's dealing with that thought process. And I've got to deal with ops. How much this matters to me more than it would have like a year or two ago when I wasn't dealing with it. And it's funny because the difference for me is the perspective of public cloud, where 4 years ago that was kind of not really a thing. And that actually leads me to a question back to you on that, and that I wanted to ask you was, so, the book obviously shows the value of IT as a core part of a business, right? And respecting that, understanding that, appreciating and putting effort and improving it. But how do you see cloud changing that with with services like infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and consumables being exterior, not quite like outsourcing? How do you see that as affecting, stuff like IT as a core and discipline and process improvement?
Gosh, wow. It's such a deep question. I'll take a stab at this, and I might be a little bit elusive. So I was talking with a friend of mine. His name is Charlie Betts. He's a longtime enterprise architect, and he and I were kind of the people who didn't quite fit in when we went to the ITIL conferences 10 years ago. And we were both sort of in a similar circles, that we're both kind of longtime ITIL practitioners and sort of now DevOps zealots. And I think one of the biggest sort of hurdles for adoption of DevOps in the enterprise is to get sort of like these silos and these centers of excellence that own a platform or own specific skills like the DBA team or the network engineering team, and to say get them out of the piecework business, right? Saying that we're not paying them for their time, right, to do work. What we really want them to do is use their knowledge and create things that other people can do instead of them, right? So we want them to build the automation mechanisms that allow kind of anybody to do their work, right? And it's not to get rid of their job; it's to get them into the systems engineering business as opposed to the operator business. And so once that happens, I think that's when you get these kind of that's when 1,000 flowers can bloom, right? It's like if you can create sort of platform as a service, if operations can do that, then they can leverage all the public cloud infrastructure out there. We can actually, allow a level of empowerment and self-service that never would have existed 5 years ago. So I see that as very, very consistent, and just I fear, at the risk of sounding elusive, I think 10 years ago, the outsourcing boom, we thought we could outsource people and have the right things happen. I think, more and more we're finding that almost it is very, very difficult to actually outsource IT and kind of get the right kind of DevOps style dynamics, because now you have a profit motive of the people being outsourced. I think what will work is, when you can leverage all these sort of things like public cloud, these online services, and I think that is what's kind of enabling this kind of incredible blossoming of innovation that the likes of we haven't seen in 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Is that resonating with you? Maybe
yeah, and really you're looking at in that instance, DevOps isn't just about being more efficient or going faster. It's actually about doing innovative things that just wouldn't be possible because you're kind of bogged down in minutia otherwise.
Right, exactly. And so we sort of framed the principles, as the three ways, right? So this is meant to be the three principles of which you could derive all the DevOps patterns from, and for that matter, probably all of the lean techniques from. And so the first way is all about the left to right flow of work, as you go from development to operations. And that, the goal there would say, it's always to increase flow from left to right, from dev to ops. And so while the DevOps practitioners would talk about like deploy rates, right, I think the real important metric is like cycle time. How long does it take you to go from, code commit into production? And, I think one of the concrete patterns that come out of that is, having environments available on demand, right? So whether it's right-clicking inside of a virtual center and recreating a production environment, or a one-step automated build process using Shepherd Puppet, I mean, no longer is it acceptable to wait 6 months for a test environment, right? That has to be able to be done on demand. So the second way is all about sort of shortening and amplifying feedback loops as you go from right to left. So the first way is left to right, from dev to ops. The second way is right to left, from ops into dev. And I think the concrete pattern that you can derive from that is waking up developers at 2 a.m. Patrick Lightbody said when he founded a company called Browser Mob. It was just kind of one of the first cloud-based load testing tools. He said, we found that when we woke developers up at 2 a.m., defects got fixed faster than ever, right? It just says that, developers or anyone upstream has to live with the consequences made downstream. In other words, people downstream, you have to share the pain. And then the third way is all about sort of how do you have a culture that allows for continual experimentation and taking risks, but also valuing repetition as a prerequisite to mastery. And that's where we get into things like, practicing daily drills. In fact, the whole Netflix chaos monkey, injecting faults into the production environment, I think is a direct, could be directly derived from the third way. So, that is as true for the IT value stream as it is in manufacturing. And, I think once we get the people and process down, that's when we can fully exploit things like, cloud, like private cloud, hybrid cloud, because that's now sort of focusing on the work center, not the person.
I want to hit on something you said there. So, one of these days people will know what's going on, but 7 months ago I started in the role I'm in now, and I've had the opportunity to build a team. And we actually have a set of core values. One of our core values is that we accept failure. We actually love failure. Failure is awesome. The great thing about failure is when it happens and you can figure out how it happened, which means you can quantify it, adjust it, replace it with non-failure. But it's not knowing when things fail. It's not understanding. It's the mystery of it that drives fear and is what we hate. And so a lot of our coding style, a lot of the way we approach things is let's fail things out so we can at least see where things fail. And that, like the Chaos Monkey stuff is a great example of what we look at, and we see that and we say this is awesome because we're saying we understand that this isn't perfect, right? I mean, it's not an art of trying to build a perfect thing. It's that Kaizen iteration of let's get better, let's improve it, let's make it faster, let's make it deploy quicker, let's focus on features over other stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
How do you, I mean?
Can I just resonate?
Yeah, go ahead, absolutely.
Just test something out for you. I think one of the prerequisites as we're writing kind of the DevOps cookbook, is that you not only want to focus on sort of transparency and taking risks, but then we also need it seems like there's this other thing that we also need, which is like maintaining the integrity of the system of work. In other words, like, you have a continual build system, you have continual testing, you have continual integration and continual deployment. And if someone breaks the build, well, then no one checks in code until we fix the build again, right? And so, to me, it's this interesting dichotomy where it's all about taking risks. But if someone does something that jeopardizes the system, you fix the system before allowing new work to come in. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I don't know. The big thing is that's really starting to really resonate with me is there needs to be and you said it earlier in the call. There's this idea of there's no me versus you in this scenario, right? That we're on the same team, so it's not a matter of me finding a way to push the fault off of me and put it on you as a dev or an ops guy. It's the understanding that accountability across borders and in the understanding that we all were working for the same goal. I mean, I think it's a core piece of what DevOps is, but I think there's like machinations and there's patterns that you can implement that will enforce that. It's like the GitHub guys and they're like amazing IM tool, right? which just blows my mind. And it's that fact of annoying accountability and the waking up at 2 a.m. and the everybody's working together. It's like everybody's responsible at the same time kind of thing. And I know it's easy to say that, but the benefits of that are immense. You get that startup-style accountability in bigger shops. You get the startup-style agility in the bigger shops.
And actually, Nick, that leads to something else in the fact that, DevOps a lot of times, at least from an operations side of the house, a lot of people start asking a lot of questions of, well, does this represent almost like a power shift, or who's really in charge? And a lot of concepts around, change is scary or change is bad, but in this instance, it isn't that way, and it is something that has to be embraced.
Well, it's a cost-benefit thing, right? I mean, honestly, change is awesome because change drives business value. And I shouldn't say across the board, but the initial concept of change is if we can do this, we can make more money. Or if we do this, we can do things in a shorter amount of time. If we do this, things get better. It's that iterative cycle. If we try to improve something, we do it, we look at it, we figure out how we can do it better, we do it again. We do it, we look at it, we think about how we can do it better, we do it again. So change as a proper process is amazing. It's just, going back to the visible ops days, it's just doing change the wrong way is dangerous. And I think Gene hit it again when he said it's approaching it from a different angle. And I think it's like, how you sharpen a pencil, right? So the visible ops was sharpening the pencil one way, unnecessary change, unaccounted for change. And DevOps is sharpening the pencil the other way, enabling change to be continuous and accelerated. And I think there's a balance to it.
So,
I would say there's kind of, in my mind, there's kind of two motivations. That if someone were saying, "Gosh, why?" If someone sort of hears DevOps and rolls their eyes, I would actually sort of, in my mind, there's two sort of relevant things that they should be aware of. One is anyone who has to live downstream of the effects. Anyone who is downstream and has to live with the daily consequences of decisions made upstream. There's actually damage done to that person, right? Because we deprive that person of control. And a friend of mine, Josh Corman, he did a study of the information security community around burnout. And they found that information security, and I'm betting ops people will be almost the same way, rated higher in burnout than trauma physicians in emergency medical care, first responders, and people doing multiple tours of duty in wartime. And the signs of burnout are fatigue, cynicism, and illusions of self-efficacy, right? And so I think cynicism for many of us is a core competency. So I think when we feel trapped in a system that preordains failure and we are powerless to change the outcomes, I think that is one of the worst things we could actually do to another human being. And ops and information security, I think, bears the brunt of that. So imagine if there was a better way to work with our dev partners and actually have shared goals. I think it really is a game changer. And I think the second thing is what Nick was saying is the economic benefits of DevOps style practices is enormous. A co-author and we did this calculation that we just want to say what is the business value that is on the table for us to be able to capture if we could just have the amount of waste associated with the IT value stream and deploy it in a way where we get 5 times the value back. The number we came up with was $2.6 trillion per year. So that's like such a huge number, right? That's more than the entire economic output of Germany. So so someone's going to take that, right? Whether it's us or our competitors, right? For the business people, that would be the message I would broadcast. The next point is that there's $2.6 trillion of economic value that's going to get recaptured. Who's going to take it? And that is a zero-sum game.
And going back to your first point, what is the amount of loss of talent due to an improper process? You have some person who is highly talented, who's very effective, who is an asset, and you invested years in them, but because of the nature of the processes and someone upstream stepping on them to a point where they get burned out and they move on, and you having to backfill them. And what's the sunk cost in just churn from replacing people that you should have never lost in the first place?
Exactly. It is incalculable. And by the way, those are the problems that sort of cause people to go home and the people around them suffer as a result, right? I mean, that's our families, that's our kids, right? Who have to deal with the person who's stressed out due to something that they can't control. I mean, it's kind of unfair.
Yeah, no, I can speak firsthand to that, having worked in the Cisco attack for about 2 years, getting beaten up all day long of nothing but stuff is broken. It mentally wears on you. I mean, it takes a toll, and yeah, I mean the life of how long people stay in those jobs was about 2 years. So, I mean, you have this terrible burden of you need to hire people, you need to recruit, you need to hire, you need to train them. They're only going to stick around for a certain period of time. All the knowledge that they've accumulated goes out the door after 2 years or some period like that, because there's no way to slow down the flow of broken stuff.
And think about what we talked about before about the 2013 results from Puppet Labs on DevOps, and a lot of the longer you do it, the longer you practice at it, right? It goes back to what Gene said about running. I mean, the longer you run, the better at you get. But it's very difficult to build that momentum if you're losing the people that are learning the practices, right? And so it's that whole thing that there's an iterative benefit to you switch the practices, you improve the morale, the people stay, they get better at it. You improve the practices, they get happier, they stay. You feed the cycle of improvement inside your own org.
Yeah, I mean, and this is this sort of discussion more and more. I mean, there's a part of this discussion where if we had this in front of a large group of people, you'd have a bunch of folks who would go, "That'll never happen. You can't change that." And those folks probably would tend to be today's IT operations people. And I think that's and I don't say that in a mean way. I highlight that because I think that's probably one of the number one causes why we have so much sort of shadow IT, if you will, or people going around IT. It's because it's not shadow IT always comes out of like IT is bad and the developers have got it figured out, or the business units. I mean, it's people just have things to get done. And so I think what ends up happening is the ops part of DevOps for a lot of corporations is somebody else's public cloud or somebody else's service, and the developers then go, good, I can go get this stuff and I can make that work. I think it's a much harder thing for the ops guys to figure out how to make those changes, because right now they're on the end of the stick that's always looking bad. It's hard for them to figure out a way to accelerate stuff typically.
Well, think about it too, like juxtapose that versus back when Agile was first introduced, right? And people came at developers and said, "Hey, check out Agile. We can do it this way, and you could have a much more of a bigger investment in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and less micromanaging by project managers and all this and this." I'm sure the developers back then, and I'm way too young to be able to speak to that, but I'm sure the developers back then were saying, "Yeah, but that's never going to happen," right? I mean, the same thing has probably been said before.
Yep.
I'm just putting for the cynics out there, right? I mean, I think some of the most inspirational stories about sort of IT transformation I've ever seen was a talk by Michael Rembetzi and Patrick McDonald at Etsy, and it was a year by year kind of play by play story of how they went from 2008 of the year. I love this quote from this their talk. It's like, the year we realized, they call it the year of pain and living in the sea of our engineering filth. The story begins after one deploy that was so bad, that when Betsy kind of went home going, "I'm not sure if I can do another deploy again." Every year, kind of what they tackled, and it was just, just listening to this talk, and it's just this magnificent story of of how things, how they made their environment better, and how they, worked more closely with development and ultimately helped the business win. It's one of my favorite. There's 120 reviews on Amazon now. I'm just delighted by this. But one of the ones that stands out in my memory is one that says, "The Phoenix Project is it gets better for IT." It's just, it's like a montage of all the things that go wrong. It's almost everything that can go wrong in IT, right? But kind of shows that there is a way out, right? It can get better, but it really does take the collective will to say, "Hey, this is our problem. We have to fix it and build that coalition to make it so."
Well, listen, guys. We've had a very, very good conversation. I have a feeling we probably could keep going for another hour so we could make a part 2 of this. But with respect to everybody's time, I know Aaron's got crazy stuff going on in the background. Nick is walking around his backyard talking to his laptop, and we've had connection challenges, but the conversation's been great. Gene, you're out and about all the time. Where can people expect to find you, I don't know, in the next couple of months if they want to connect with you, buy you a beer, buy you a drink, talk about this stuff?
Let's see here. So the place I'm really excited about going is I'm going to be at the Mountain West Ruby Conference in Salt Lake City. I'm going to be at Source Boston and the DevOps meetup in New York City, and then ChefConf later that week, and then DevOps Days Austin. By the way, if anyone hasn't gotten a chance to go to one of the DevOps Days, I would say make time to go. It is one of those vibrant communities I've ever seen. And whether you're in ops or dev or test or information security, you just have to go to one of these, because I think just even going will be as invigorating and maybe even give you a cause for hope. That was very much like going to the Velocity Conference, for me. So, cool. Get out to a DevOps Days.
Excellent.
Awesome. Very cool.
So, and of course, you can always find Gene at Real Gene Kim on Twitter and on his website. We'll have all that in the show notes. Well, folks, I think we're going to wrap it up for tonight. It's been a great conversation. We're going to put a couple of additional links in the show notes for some stuff that Gene's been sending us as we're going along, things to go back and refer to. And but Aaron, you want to take us out? Or do you want me to take us out?
Sure, I can do it this week. So, if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes, and you can follow us on Twitter at @thecloudcastnet or on the web at thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. Thanks, Gene. Thanks, Nick. And thanks to everyone for listening.